The storm outside was fierce, raging with a fury that mirrored the turmoil inside the small home on the island. The island was not just any place. It was steeped in ancient lore. Among its many tales was a prophecy that one day a child would be born with the spirit of a wolf, being of both man and beast, possessing the instincts and heart that humans revered. On this night the winds howled as if echoing the pain of the young mother, who lay on the brink of giving birth. This was her third child, yet the agony she endured now was unlike anything she had felt before. Her husband, filled with fear and helplessness, clutched her hand, trying to offer her comfort. The nearest hospital was 30 kilometers away, a distance impossible to cover in this storm. The island, though developed, seemed vast and isolating in moments like these. As the storm raged on, the couple sought refuge in the only place they could find, one of the island's many mosques. It was Thursday night, and the mosque's cleric, Hamza, was preparing to lock up after the Isha prayer. But when the couple stumbled through the door, drenched and desperate, he saw something in their eyes that stopped him cold. He had seen that look before, in the mirror, on a night much like this one. Years ago, Hamza had faced a similar storm. His wife had been in labor, just as this woman was now. But unlike this couple, he had not been as fortunate. The storm had claimed his child before he ever had a chance to hold him. The wolves, which the islanders revered, had howled mournfully that night, as if sharing in his grief. Seeing the fear in the couple's eyes, Hamza's heart ached with an old familiar pain. He could not turn them away. "Come," he said gently, leading them to a small, private room within the mosque. The woman's cries of pain grew sharper, piercing the air like the lightning that split the sky outside. Recognizing the urgency, Hamza quickly summoned his wife, a midwife who had delivered countless babies on the island. She arrived, her face calm and composed, though her heart pounded in her chest. She knew all too well the fragility of life, especially on nights like this. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the woman's labor intensified. The storm outside roared on, but within the mosque, there was only the sound of her anguished cries and the whispered prayers of her husband. Hamza paced outside the door, his mind torn between the past and the present. He prayed silently, hoping that at this time the storm would not claim another life. And then a sound broke through the tension. A baby's cry, strong and insistent. The man rushed into the room, tears streaming down his face as the midwife placed his newborn son in his arms. "It's a boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And your wife? She is safe." Relief and joy flooded the man's heart, but as he looked down at his son, a shadow passed over him. He turned to Hamza, who stood quietly in the corner, his eyes filled with something that was both sadness and longing. Hamza had done so much for them, saved his wife and child on this stormy night. The man felt a deep need to offer something in return, something more meaningful than words. He asked Hamza what he could do to repay him. Hamza shook his head. "There is nothing you owe me," he said softly. Yet, after much insistence, Hamza finally shared his story, the story of the child he had lost, the child who had never been given a name. "If you wish to do something for me," Hamza said, his voice trembling, "would you consider naming your son Umer?" It was the name I had chosen for my child, the one I never got to hold. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. The weight of Hamza's request pressed heavily on him. He promised to think it over and to announce his decision after the Jummah prayer the next day. That night, as the storm continued to batter the island, the man sat beside his wife, who was now resting peacefully. He told her of Hamza's request, and she looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Our son is a miracle," she whispered, "born not in a hospital, but in a house of God. Perhaps he was meant to carry the name of a child who could not." Morning came, and with it, the storm finally began to wane. The islanders who had heard of the miraculous birth gathered at the mosque after the Jummah prayer to congratulate the new father. Hamza stood among them, his heart heavy with hope and fear. He had dared to ask for something that meant the world to him. He knew he had no right to it. When the man, Muhammad Ali, stepped forward to speak, the room fell silent. He spoke of the storm, the fear, and the overwhelming gratitude he felt for Hamza's kindness. And then, with a voice full of emotion, he announced, "My son will bear the name Umer, in honor of the child who was lost, and in gratitude to the man who saved him. Hamza's breath caught in his throat, and tears welled up in his eyes. As the crowd murmured their approval, he approached Ali, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you." The mosque, which had been a place of refuge and sorrow, now echoed with the sounds of joy and celebration. The name Umair, once a symbol of loss, had become a beacon of hope carried by a child whose life had begun in the midst of a storm.